I want to tell you something that I've never said out loud before. A few years ago, I sat alone in my parked car outside a grocery store. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, eyes blurry with tears. I couldn't move. I didn't even know what aisle I'd walked into the parking lot from. I just remember thinking, I can't do this anymore. And what I meant by this wasn't life exactly. It was the way I was living it, the spiral of anxiety, the self-doubt that clung to me like a wet coat I couldn't take off, the noise in my mind that never, ever stopped, the worry, the fear, the pressure to prove I was okay when I wasn't. That moment, raw, humiliating, so human, became the beginning of something unexpected. Because I realized the only way out wasn't out there. It was in here. In my mind. Before we begin, if this message resonates with you even just a little, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Let's build a space where truth feels safe, growth feels sacred, and we remind each other we're not alone in this human experience. I want you to imagine your mind as a vast, wild garden. No fences, no rules, just soil waiting for something to grow. Now, here's the hard truth. This garden doesn't care what you plant. If you plant anger, it'll grow. If you plant fear, self-doubt, or resentment, it will grow those too. Lush and tangled, even toxic. And if you plant kindness, focus, hope, or discipline, it will just as easily grow those. But here's the catch. Most of us inherited our mental gardens full of weeds we didn't plant. Maybe someone once told you that you weren't good enough, and that weed took root. Maybe you failed once or 100 times, and that failure became a vine that wrapped around your confidence. Maybe someone left or hurt you or made you believe you were too much or not enough. And without even realizing it, your garden started to mirror the pain rather than your potential. We walk around every day thinking we are the mess we see in our minds, when in truth, we've just forgotten we're the gardeners. We've forgotten we have the power to decide what stays and what goes. We have the ability, yes, the right, to pull up what doesn't serve us anymore. I remember a moment in my own life when I realized I was feeding thoughts that were hurting me. Not loud, dramatic thoughts, but subtle ones. The kind that slip in between conversations. The kind that whisper things like, why even try? Or, you'll never get it right, they're sneaky. They sound like logic, but they're lies dressed up as caution. So I started small. I began noticing. That's the first act of discipline, awareness. I'd catch myself mid-thought, like a hand hovering over a switch. Wait a second. Do I want to grow this? Do I want to feel this thought tomorrow too? And often the answer was no. The hardest part wasn't recognizing the weeds. It was believing I could uproot them, that I didn't have to let the past decide the climate of my future, that I could actually choose different thoughts and repeat them, nourish them until they felt like truth. This kind of mental discipline isn't about control, it's about care. It's a practice of devotion to the life you want to live and the person you are becoming. You show up each day with your small tools, awareness, patience, truth, and you pull one weed, plant one seed, and then again the next day, and again the next. There's nothing flashy about it, but it is sacred. Because over time, this gentle, honest tending becomes a kind of freedom. Your mind becomes a space where you can breathe, where you can rest, where you can dream again. Our minds, as miraculous and intelligent as they are, can also be incredibly noisy, chaotic places. One moment you're sipping coffee, and the next, out of nowhere, you're spiraling through a memory from 5 years ago, wondering if that one awkward thing you said at a dinner party secretly ruined your life. Sound familiar? Thoughts appear like uninvited guests. Some are kind, some are curious, but many are critical, anxious, or just plain mean. And when they show up, we often make the mistake of thinking they're true, or worse, that they define who we are. But the truth is, thoughts are not facts. They're not mandates. They're not even always accurate. They're just mental weather passing clouds, shifting winds, occasional storms. They come and go. And you are the sky, You are what remains. You are not the thought that says, I'm not good enough. You are not the thought that says, everyone is ahead of me. You are not the thought that says, what's the point? You are the one hearing those thoughts, which means you are the observer. You are the awareness behind the noise, and that gives you a beautiful liberating power, choice. When I first began noticing the chatter in my mind, I felt overwhelmed. It was like I was sitting in a crowded train station, and every thought was a train begging me to board. Some trains pulled up and shouted, "Let's revisit every failure you've ever had." Others offered a ride through self-comparison or worst-case scenarios, and I had been hopping on every single one without realizing it. But what changed everything for me was this. I started asking myself, do I want to go where this thought is taking me? That one question became a lifeline. Because once you know a thought is just a passenger, you don't have to let it drive the bus. You can notice it, you can breathe, and you can choose to let it pass without following it into a dead-end street of shame or anxiety. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. Sometimes those thoughts are so convincing they feel like truth wrapped in fear. Sometimes they echo voices we've heard since childhood. But discipline starts here, with the courage to pause and question. It's like standing at the doorway of your mind and saying, hey, I see you, but you're not welcome here anymore. And yes, some thoughts are stubborn. They don't leave quietly. They return again and again, hoping you'll believe them this time. But with practice, they lose their power. And the most beautiful part? When you stop feeding the thoughts that hurt you, they slowly begin to wither. When you stop believing every mental narrative, you begin to author your own. That's the shift. That's where discipline becomes liberation. So no, you don't have to argue with every thought. You don't have to fix every feeling. You just have to remember, you are the thinker, not the thought. ChatGPT said, let's talk about focus. Not the kind of focus we force ourselves into when we're on a deadline or trying to finish something last minute. I mean the kind of deep, intentional focus that quietly shapes the course of your entire life. Because whether we're aware of it or not, our focus is always creating something. It's building the scaffolding of our reality. It's like sunlight. Whatever we shine it on grows. Whatever we keep returning to with our attention becomes part of our emotional and mental landscape. The mind is incredibly obedient. Whatever story we tell it, it tries to prove true. If you keep telling yourself, I'm not lovable, your brain will go looking for evidence. If you whisper, nothing ever works out for me, your mind will find examples to support it. It doesn't mean those things are true. It just means the brain is brilliant at fulfilling prophecy, especially the ones we repeat. It's like wearing tinted glasses. If the lens is blue, everything you see will carry that shade. If your lens is fear, the world will feel threatening. If your lens is scarcity, even abundance will feel not enough. If your lens is worthlessness, even love will look suspicious. So the real shift happens not when we change the world outside us, but when we change the lens we're looking through. I remember during one of the most emotionally draining seasons of my life, I had become so consumed with what was wrong, what I'd lost, what I couldn't control, what hadn't turned out the way I hoped. I would lie in bed at night and replay every misstep, every awkward conversation, every fear about the future like a movie stuck on loop. I wasn't living, I was surviving through hypervigilance and emotional exhaustion. Then one morning, something inside me softened. I got out of bed, walked to my kitchen, and the sunlight hit the edge of my coffee mug just right. I know that sounds small, maybe even ridiculous, but in that instant, I felt a kind of gentle awe I hadn't felt in months. Not because the coffee was magical, but because I noticed it. That was the beginning of a new practice, noticing what is good. And I don't mean fake positivity or ignoring reality. I mean choosing on purpose to focus on what brings peace, what invites gratitude, what reminds me of beauty, even if it's tiny. That one shift from focusing on what was wrong to what was present, began to change how I felt, how I spoke, how I walked through the world. My reality didn't transform overnight. Better, worse. It changed how I felt, how I thought, because it meant so much for me. Because it meant so much for me. Even if it's tiny, I felt it much bigger as a parent. Knowing that my jobs are not the same as they were before. My house is not the same as it was before. My house is not the same as it was before, but the weight of it did. You see, whatever you focus on, you feel. And whatever you feel repeatedly becomes your lived experience. So when you begin to discipline your focus, you aren't just managing your thoughts. You're building a new emotional home. It's like standing in front of a giant control panel with hundreds of dials. You may not be able to turn off the noise of life completely, but you can reach out with steady hands and turn down the volume on what's loud and toxic. You can turn up the dial on what's peaceful, honest, and life-giving. So how do we begin? Start with one breath, one moment of awareness. Catch yourself when your focus drifts to the familiar territory of fear or lack, and gently guide it elsewhere. Not by force, by invitation. What else is here right now that I'm not seeing? What is still beautiful even in the middle of this mess? What thought would feel like sunlight right now? The discipline of focus is not about perfection. It's not about denying your pain. It's about expanding your capacity to also see what's still good, what's still possible, what's still worthy of love. Because when you shift your focus, you shift your frequency. And when you shift your frequency, the world starts to meet you differently. When we hear the word discipline, most of us tense up. We associate it with punishment, restriction, shame, or self-denial. For many of us, discipline has the flavor of harshness. Wake up earlier, do more, push harder, fix yourself. It's often tied to the voice inside our heads that says we're only worthy when we're achieving, when we're productive, when we're getting it all right. But real discipline, the kind that transforms your life, is not an act of cruelty. It's an act of deep, reverent self-compassion. Let that land. Discipline is not the same as self-punishment. Discipline in its truest form is the daily decision to love yourself enough to do what your soul needs, even when your emotions resist it, even when your habits don't align with it, even when the easier choice is to numb out. And that kind of discipline, it's tender, it's honest, and yes, it's incredibly courageous. I used to think I needed discipline to fix myself, to correct what was broken. I had this toxic idea that if I could just be more efficient, more controlled, more perfect, I'd finally be enough. But the more I chased discipline from that place of shame, the more it backfired. I'd start strong, full of force and frustration, and then crash when I couldn't sustain it. And every time I stumbled, the shame deepened. The cycle tightened. It wasn't until I started seeing discipline not as punishment, but as protection, that everything began to change. You see, I started asking myself different questions. What if discipline is me saying, I deserve peace, so I will choose rest even when the world tells me to hustle? What if discipline is me saying, I love myself enough to not text that person back because they don't treat me with care? What if discipline is waking up to move my body, not because I hate it, but because it's sacred and carrying me through this life? That's when I realized discipline is one of the most compassionate boundaries you can set with yourself. It's saying, I won't abandon myself today, not mentally, emotionally, or physically. I will show up for me, especially when it's hard. And it will be hard. Not because you're weak, but because healing habits take time, especially when you've spent years building survival patterns instead. There are going to be mornings you want to stay in bed, days when your mind screams for distraction, nights when your old coping mechanisms call out like sirens. Discipline isn't about being unaffected by these things. It's about noticing them and still choosing to care for yourself instead of betraying yourself. You won't get it right every time, and that's okay. Because discipline and grace are not enemies. In fact, they need each other. The goal isn't to become a machine, The goal is to become more whole, more integrated, more consistent in your love for yourself. And that kind of discipline doesn't drain you. It strengthens you. It builds the muscles of trust between you and yourself. It teaches your nervous system safety. It teaches your heart that it no longer has to live in chaos to feel alive. You begin to believe, truly believe, that you are worth the effort, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And that belief becomes the foundation for everything else. So don't think of discipline as a heavy burden you have to carry. Think of it as a quiet daily vow, a promise you whisper to yourself each morning. I will not abandon you today. I will choose what is good for you, even if it's not easy. I will show up because you are worth being shown up for. That is the discipline that shifts your reality, not through force, but through love. Relentless, kind, disciplined love. And here's the part most people don't talk about when it comes to transforming your mind and shifting your reality. You will outgrow people, patterns, and parts of yourself that once felt like home, and it will hurt. Yes, discipline brings clarity. Yes, focus creates peace. Yes, the work of reshaping your thoughts and reclaiming your self-worth brings freedom. But it also comes with grief, not always the loud kind, but the quiet ache of leaving behind familiar pain, familiar coping, familiar relationships that no longer align with who you're becoming. See, when you start showing up for yourself, truly, consistently, it disrupts the unspoken agreements you've had with your past. You stop people-pleasing. You stop tolerating disrespect. You stop living small just to make others comfortable. You stop living for other people's recognition. You stop living for others' praise. 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 And in doing so, you start losing things you once held on to for dear life. But here's the truth. What you're losing is not your life. It's your limits. You're shedding versions of yourself that were built in survival, in fear, in scarcity. You're peeling back the layers that were never really you, just adaptations, clever, necessary, but temporary. And that is not a tragedy. That is rebirth. And that is not a tragedy, that is rebirth. There is a strange loneliness that comes with growth, and that is not a tragedy. That is rebirth. There's a strange loneliness that comes with growth. Suddenly, the things that used to thrill you feel empty. The conversations that used to light you up now drain you. The environments you once begged to be included in no longer feel safe. And that's okay. In fact, it's proof that your mind is evolving, that your nervous system is healing, that your soul is remembering who it's always been underneath the noise. But here's the sacred part. As you discipline your mind, your external life begins to echo your internal transformation. You start making decisions not from fear, but from alignment. You start creating space for what matters. You become more intentional with your time, your energy, your words, and over time, your life becomes a reflection of your healing, not your hurt. I remember sitting alone one evening after a hard decision, one that cost me a relationship I cared about deeply, but that I knew was no longer healthy. My whole body trembled with grief. I kept asking, why does choosing myself have to feel like losing everything? And the answer came, not in words, but in a quiet knowing. Because you're not losing everything. You're losing the parts that kept you from being fully alive. That's what discipline gives you. Not just a stronger mind, but a more authentic life. One where you don't have to fake it, shrink, or prove your worth. One where your peace isn't performative, it's rooted. One where your dreams are no longer just ideas, but plans in motion. One where you finally feel safe in your own presence. But here's the final and maybe most important thing. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful. There will be days you fall back into old thought patterns, days you spiral, days you want to quit. Discipline doesn't erase those moments. It meets them with gentleness. It reminds you that progress is not linear. It whispers, you're still growing, even when you're struggling. So if you're in a season where it feels like everything is shifting, where you're both proud of your growth and terrified of what it's costing you, know this: you're not breaking down, you're breaking through. You are becoming someone who no longer settles for the scraps of your own potential. You are creating a new inner reality, and the outside world will catch up in time. You are learning to live in integrity with your truth, not your trauma. That's not easy work. That's brave work. And maybe that's the most beautiful shift of all. When you realize the most disciplined thing you can do is keep choosing your healing, even when it hurts. Because on the other side of all that discomfort is a life you don't have to escape from, a self you can come home to, a reality that reflects the truth you've always carried inside. You are worthy. You are capable. And you are already becoming everything you were meant to be. I'll leave you with this. Your mind is not your enemy. It's your companion. It's been doing its best with the tools it had, and now you get to offer it new tools, new thoughts, new focus, new love. So today, don't try to overhaul everything. Just choose one thing, one thought, one practice, one step. Tend to your mind like it matters, because it does. Protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. And trust that the smallest shift in your mind can lead to the greatest shift in your life. If this message spoke to something inside of you, if it reminded you that you're allowed to hope again, share it with someone who might need the same reminder. And remember, you don't have to be fearless to begin. You just have to be willing. We're all growing through this together. One breath, one thought, one brave moment at a time. Thank you for being here. Keep going. The world needs what you're becoming.